Hey, what's going on? I'm Ebe, and this is the first of many videos on application security. Through these videos, I hope to explain what application security is, why I think it's important, and how it fits into the broader context of any mature security program. This is more of an introductory video, so if you're a seasoned veteran of application security, this might not be the right video for you, but if you're interested on building a foundation and getting involved in more in-depth topics later on, this might be the right place for you. So one of my goals is to instill this idea of an attacker's mindset into all of you. This means adopting the perspective of an attacker, specifically an ethical one, hopefully, fingers crossed. We want to identify weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and attack vectors, etc. before they're exploited by bad actors. What are bad actors? They're the hackers, they're the bad folks who want to abuse our application logic, who want to do bad things with our apps. If you're not thinking like an attacker when you're architecting, building, maintaining, or even deprecating a system, then you might overlook something and you might end up with an insecure system. We, hopefully as ethical hackers, need to constantly challenge ourselves with the question, how can I break this? How can I break this? I also want to get you in the mindset of a defender. This is probably something that most of us in security are familiar with, or most of us with an idea of cybersecurity might be familiar with. This is focused on protecting. This is defense. Detecting, responding to, incident handling kind of thing. It's about building and maintaining defenses to keep systems safe, even while under duress, even while under attack. I think defending is more difficult than attacking. As defenders, we need to be right every single time, and as attackers, you usually only need to be right once. When architecting, building, or maintaining a system, we need to constantly ask ourselves, how can we defend this? So application security, I'm not sure if there's any one right definition for what it is. I might define it as the strategies, tools, processes, and procedures that are implemented or can be implemented to secure code. Remember, securing code throughout the software development lifecycle, or SDLC. The key focus of any AppSec program should include, not limited to, secure coding practices. This means writing secure code, writing code with security in mind to prevent vulnerabilities. What are vulnerabilities? We'll get into that later, but these are things like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, think OWASP top 10 type stuff. We'll get into that later too. Key focus of AppSec, in addition to secure coding practices, are security testing. So this means employing tools and platforms like SAST, DAST, and SCA. This also means ensuring that libraries and dependencies are up to date and are free from vulnerabilities. This might also mean security testing against the application and implementing robust mechanisms to verify authentication and authorization. Basically making sure that you control user access to something. So product security is more of a broader topic. It's much more involved. It extends beyond just the code to involve the security posture of the entire product. This includes a comprehensive approach focusing on protecting the product throughout its entire life cycle. The key elements of product security include security by design. So this means integrating security right from the product design phase, covering both hardware and software components. Supply chain security, managing the security of the supply chain, the different components, the third-party components, first-party components, the manufacturing processes, delivery mechanisms, just making sure they don't compromise the product integrity, the product security. Security updates and patch management. This means regularly updating products to address vulnerabilities and enhance security features. And product security can be thought of like protecting the app end to end, ensuring the security of the product as a whole, including data in transit, at rest, and in storage. Why is AppSec so difficult? I mean, there's a ton of reasons. They really stem from its complexity. It's really hard to do especially if you're not familiar with how applications and systems work. You really have to know a lot, not only about development, but just about basically everything has to do with the internet and computers, networking, OS. It's context dependent, so you have to know a lot about your environment. What might work for me might not work for you, and vice versa. I won't go into all the reasons, but at the heart of it, the internet wasn't built with security in mind. It was built for connectivity. It wasn't built with first principles. It evolved over time, and each iteration tacked on new things, and with that came new security challenges. In general, application security is just expensive. It takes a lot of investment, not only human capital, but just money, just effort. Tools are expensive. Training people, learning applications, working with the devs, just devs' time. It's just so expensive, and it's so hard to do at scale. At smaller places, at smaller shops, it might be easier to do just if you're involved from the start, but it gets so much more expensive, exponentially more expensive after an application is released. In my experience, one of the other big reasons, and again, I won't go into all these, but a big reason is security almost always takes the backseat to things like feature development, user experience, and performance. Security is all too often seen as a cost center. Even though we reduce risk, we do cost money and time. And this usually leads to compromises, and compromises might mean releasing insecure code. Unfortunately, there's also just a massive, huge underworld market for exploits and owned systems. There's a lot of money to be made. There's a lot of money being made in exploit development, in system access, ransomware, denial of service, spam, social engineering, the list goes on. In that same vein, there's like so little money. There's just echelons lower of money involved in responsible disclosure or security research, bug bounty. Every other month I hear about just this catastrophic vulnerability, this critical vulnerability that was disclosed by some good person or some ethical hacker, and they were only paid out pennies compared to the amount of risk or the amount of headache that this could have caused. Basically, you hear about, or I hear about, some vulnerability that could have absolutely melted an ecosystem or an application. It just could have had catastrophic effects, and they were only paid like $100, a couple $1,000, basically like a drop in the bucket compared to what they could have sold for in the exploit market. Again, I won't cover all these, but the list goes on. There's just so much that goes into why it's hard to do, but it can be done. I want to switch gears a little bit to cover some development topics. So the software development lifecycle, or SDLC, is a structured approach used for developing software. Development teams, they either customize their own SDLC or adopt an existing one based on their requirements, based on the project requirements. Think of an SDLC as a roadmap for building an application. It provides a general map of each step that should be approached and completed. A very common, very old school, tried and true tested method of software development, or a model of software development, is the waterfall model, the waterfall method. Waterfall is highly structured. It's a very structured approach. Basically, each and every step needs to be finalized completely and formally approved before moving on to the next phase, the next step. Basically, by finalizing each phase completely before moving on, it minimizes the chances of cost overrun, of project overrun, and unmet requirements. It's so good when it comes to meeting known requirements. It's really good at that, and it's that much worse when it comes to unknown requirements, like security findings, like security non-functional requirements. It's very painful when it comes to those unknowns, those unknown requirements. That's why it's so important to get security, NFRs get security involved from the get-go, from the requirements analysis, from before the system design phase. Just get security involved so early on in the project to help reduce that spend. Traditional software development usually follows a similar kind of linear approach like waterfall. Usually what happens is developers write code and forward it to operations, and they deploy it and release the software. All too often, just historically, especially at companies where security just doesn't matter that much, security is just an afterthought and introduced very late, if not at all. Might be bolted on with a couple tools and they call it a day. So DevOps, what is it? DevOps integrates development and operations into a continuous cycle. See this infinity symbol? Its goal is efficiency through automation. Usually takes a strong investment up front. DevSecOps is the evolution of that, where security is integrated directly into the stages of the SDLC, into this DevOps life cycle. It's a blend of development and security and operations. It really emphasizes the importance of security in the early stages of the SDLC rather than treating it as an afterthought. It's just another phase within this never-ending cycle. And this approach is very focused on close collaboration with teams, and it really doesn't work in environments where development is really segregated or siloed from operations, or when security is just off doing their own thing. It just doesn't work. You have to be really, really very much in lockstep with each other. So why should we care? Why does anyone care about AppSec? Basically, all software has bugs, and some percentage of those bugs will be security vulnerabilities. So it's not a jump to say that all software has security vulnerabilities. I'm not saying all software has critical vulnerabilities, but all software probably has some security vulnerabilities. As I kind of alluded to earlier, the cost associated with identifying and fixing bugs increases throughout the software development lifecycle. As a product is released through those iterations, it just costs more money. Addressing bugs after a code release or after an application release can be so expensive and so time-consuming and very risky. I think everyone here who's worked on an application or a project knows that modifying code to resolve one bug can cause other bugs, and security findings are just bugs. So patching one security bug can lead to other security bugs. Like I mentioned, the cost of identifying and correcting a security vulnerability grows as time goes on, as the SDLC progresses. Or as an application progresses throughout the SDLC. And most bugs are introduced in the early stages of the SDLC. They're introduced when code is written. Addressing bugs before they're written or when they're written saves money, especially when compared to the later stages of the SDLC, like the testing and the deployments and maintenance phases. So fixing those bugs earlier on is less expensive. The cost of defects goes down as editorialized in this cartoon. This is often called shifting left. The question is, how do we do this? Well, one way is to use a list of secure design practices, or a very prescriptive kind of baseline. Think of it as a checklist. These are like the bare minimum things that every project should follow, every dev should follow when they're writing code. There's some really excellent resources out there. They're open source, they're free, they're made by people way smarter than any one individual, by a dedicated group of folks who came together to write these things. They have prescriptive security best practice guides, architectures, models, frameworks available. I'm talking about OWASP, Open Web Application Security Project. We've probably all heard about OWASP. They have very well thought out, well respected documents. They're basically standards, and I have yet to meet any application security person, any security person who hasn't at least heard of OWASP. Their dev guide is pretty good. They have tons of cheat sheets out there, and all their stuff is free. Well, most of their stuff is free. Probably their most well-known project is the OWASP Top 10, but there's maturity models. There's just some really great stuff out there. OWASP Top 10, it's a standard awareness document based on a survey of top coding mistakes. The list was updated in 2021, but I wouldn't say that it changed too much because people are still doing the same stuff. They're still making the same mistakes, just things slid around a little bit. While the OWASP Top 10 is great, there are many more things to be concerned or be aware of. External libraries is one of them. I guess that could fit into security misconfigurations or software integrity failures. Pick your poison, I guess, but no one writes their own code from scratch anymore. There's just too much to be written, and there's just not enough hours in the day. So people end up relying on code written by other people, either open source or closed source or proprietary. Not all code is trustworthy, however. Even reputable or seemingly trustworthy code needs to be double checked. If you haven't written it yourself, how can you know that it's free from vulnerabilities or just features that you're not really jazzed on introducing into your app? The list of known issues with external libraries is really long, and there's real world implications with security vulnerabilities in well-known packages or well-known libraries. This includes Heartbeat, Shellshock, Log4j, Struts, Eternal Blue. First or third party, the code needs to be identified. It needs to be treated just like any other code, and it needs to be scanned. It needs to be taken care of. It needs to be free of vulnerabilities. First or third party code ends up built into the product either way. So the earlier you identify issues with it, the better. This leads me to the concept of an SBOM. This is kind of a newer, I guess, business phrase, or might be like a sales tactic. Some of you might not like to hear this, but like a traditional SBOM, it's for a physical product. It's a record detailing every single component, every single library, dependency, every single piece part of an application or service. It includes the required versions and what vulnerabilities might exist in the system. It helps enable teams to track and manage vulnerabilities effectively. I'm not going to speak to the praises of any one company. You can definitely generate your own SBOM. The important thing is that you have visibility into what makes up your application, your Frankenstein's monster. And this can be really helpful in security assessments and when identifying potential vulnerable or compromised pieces or elements in the system. I want to give you a real world example. There's a ton of them out there, but this is one from last month. So you guys might know about this, or you all might know about this. Garbage collector or garbage collection is the process of tracking live objects while destroying unreferenced objects in memory. This basically makes room for new objects that will be created in the future. So GC Stats exposes stats about Google's open source high performance JS WebAssembly engine. This is built into Chrome and Node.js. I think it's called V8GC. This exposes stats after V8GC has been executed. As of April 15th, there were around 90,000 downloads of this popular package called GC Stats. Note that the package was deprecated a while back, and the last update was published 2 months ago. So I looked into it, and the project was abandoned actually in 2021, September 2021. At the time of this recording, when I looked into this, it was April of 2024. So due to some attacks running up a bill for the maintainer, they dropped the ownership of the bucket. So the bucket hosted pre-built binaries for that GC stats package in a very popular version of the library. I think I'm not going to name the URL, but they gave up that URL, or they gave up that bucket, and someone squatted on it basically. The maintainer also added a note about using it at your own risk. They archived the project. They made it very clear that they don't maintain ownership as of April 2nd. And basically version 1.4.0 was using pre-built binaries that point to an attacker's S3 bucket. So what's the root cause of this particular issue? Of course, there's the greater issue of software developers who write code for fun, or they maintain open source projects. They're not respected, they're not paid, they're not given the respect that they deserve, and they don't have the time or the money or the effort to maintain these projects. And it turns out millions of people use them and they don't pay anything for them. So I guess maybe that's probably the root cause, but for the root cause of this specific issue is subdomain takeover, more specifically bucket takeover. So subdomain takeovers happen when domains or subdomains are pointed to services that have been decommissioned, deleted, or deprecated. This basically leaves them up for grabs. It's really easy to do, just in general, like it's really low-hanging fruit. The barrier to entry is really low. All you need to do is enumerate subdomains using some tool, or you can write something using, you can do this manually. You can check to verify that a domain was abandoned, and then you just register the domain yourself. The bucket where GC stats downloaded, the bucket where GC stats hosted those binaries was taken over, and basically an attacker scanned AWS buckets searching for recently deprecated buckets. They squatted on the name and they just can do whatever they want. So thinking like an attacker, what do you think is possible with that domain? And you're welcome to pause and do some research, but spoiler alert, they took it over. Basically, an attacker can do whatever they want. They can distribute malware or malicious code. They can compromise the integrity of the binary and thus the integrity of any downstream software. They could re-upload the binary with whatever. They could add a tracking pixel, or they could harvest data. In this case, it's basically allowing an RCE, remote code execution, the worst of the worst. Vulnerabilities, they can just run commands arbitrarily. Probably someone could have easily replaced the binary with a poisoned one, like I mentioned before, having injected their own malicious features into it. They could use it for social engineering, phishing, the list goes on. That's why it's so important that we need to verify the authenticity of dependencies, regularly updating and patching software and components, treating those third-party components and proprietary and open source components just like any other piece of code in your app. As defenders, we need to be aware of the components that make up our app. This is where something like an SBOM, or maybe even just a list of components, come into play. This is also where tools or processes like SCA, software composition analysis, is also useful. SCA is a tool that identifies vulnerabilities in components and license compliance issues and tracks dependencies. Integrating SCA into the SDLC can help with the continuous and early detection of issues with components. So there's many paid and open source SCA technologies. If you're not into writing your own, of course, like you may not have the resources. There's folks who've done the hard work for you. Just do your homework and integrate it into your platform if you can. It might take some initial investment in getting them set up, but the returns are there, especially with the reduction in risk. So I don't want to talk at you too long or too much longer. I'm new to this, but I want to close this out by mentioning vulnerability testing, a topic we're all probably familiar with in AppSec. There's major classes: SAST, DAST. SAST analyzes source code, or compiled binaries to identify vulnerabilities without executing the code. No code execution. No code is running. And DAST, test applications at runtime. SDLC. A big thing I want you to remember is that tools can only do so much. I don't have the exact percentage, but it's not great in coverage. They're not going to find everything. They're especially not going to find those really heavy-hitting business logic flaws. That's why you need to be really well aware of what's in your app. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, it's a lot of application security is context dependent. What might work for you doesn't work for me. What you might find in your app might only be found in your app because you built that business logic. So vulnerability testing using software only represents just a sliver, just a part of any mature application security program. Hopefully in later videos or in someone else's great video on the topic, you might be able to understand the other pieces. In my experience, effective application security begins with a thorough understanding of the business objectives and priority. We as application security folks, we as security, we as IT, we serve the business. We're a service-based part of the business. We should be focused on our stakeholders, on our customers. It's important to keep that in mind as we protect our applications. In e-commerce, being able to sell product is the number one priority. Of course, there's protecting the customers and protecting data, but you have no business if you can't sell product. Think of that and apply that kind of mindset when you're making investments in application security. You're not doing it for no reason. You're serving your business. Make sure you understand those priorities. Make sure you understand those objectives that will help you throughout the AppSec lifecycle, throughout building your AppSec program. I would say the next step is to really understand your environment. This means taking stock, taking inventory of the different parts in your environment, including its components. How can you ever protect anything if you don't know what it is? From that information, you can begin the concurrent processes that are threat modeling, that are attack surface reduction and remediation based on risk. Prioritizing remediation, prioritizing mitigation, defenses based on your organization's acceptable level of risk. Basically, these concurrent processes never end. They're iterative, and it's really dependent on how far you want to take an application security program, what your business is ready to do, and what you're ready to take on. Your business priority, basically. Yeah, that's all I got for this video. Hopefully I'll have more. Please leave me a comment, message, whatever. I'm hoping that these videos serve someone, or I'm hoping to give back to the community in any way I can. Just give me some pointers. I'm new to this, so let me know. Thanks.